Welcome to ancient Greece, land of gods, glory, and absolutely no pants. It gave us democracy, philosophy, and the kind of statues that somehow still get banned on Instagram. But while the myths are grand and the temple's golden, real life was rough. So let's forget the marble fantasies and drop you into an average Athenian morning. You're not a hero, philosopher, or demigod. You're just some regular person trying to get through another sweltering day without collapsing from heat stroke or getting trampled by a goat. You wake up with the sun, not because it's poetic, but because your house has turned into an oven. No windows, just holes with wooden shutters. No insulation. No glass. No peace. Your home is built from mud bricks and optimism. And yes, the family goat probably sleeps 2 feet from your head. Your mattress? A scratchy mat stuffed with straw and disappointment. Your pillow? A rolled-up cloak. If you're lucky, the lice didn't throw a party on your scalp last night. But probably they did. There's no tap. No sink. No 5-minute morning routine. Want water? Grab a clay jar and walk to the public fountain. Or worse, a distant well. You carry it back, hoping not to trip and baptize the dirt with your spine. Every drop is work. Every slip is a tragedy. You don't shower. You oil yourself up. Literally. Rub olive oil on your skin, then scrape it off with a curved metal blade called a strigil. It doesn't clean you. It just removes the top layer of regret. It's less spa day and more salad dressing with ambition. And no, you don't do this alone. Hygiene is a group activity. Naked. Loud. Not optional. Teeth? You rub them with charcoal or vinegar. No toothbrush. No minty freshness. Just hope and a twig. Your tunic, basically a rectangle of linen with dreams, is damp within minutes. Your sandals, if you even own them, are falling apart. If you're barefoot, you're navigating sun-baked rocks, goat poop, and whatever the market left behind. It's a daily game of is this mud or something worse? And breakfast? Don't expect pancakes. You get barley bread. Stale. Hard. Named maza, but it might as well be called chew brick. Maybe you dunk it in wine because the water will kill you. Literally. The wine's not for fun. It's watered down and barely fermented, just enough to keep the microbes at bay. Extras? If you're rich, olives, figs, maybe a crumb of goat cheese. But you're not rich. You're just hoping today's bread doesn't have bugs. Spoiler, it probably does. There's no coffee. No fruit bowl. No eggs your way. Just dry bread, diluted wine, and silence. Meals are short. No chairs. No forks. No time. Chew. Swallow. Get on with your suffering. And if you're a woman, you eat later. After the men. Probably standing. Because of course you do. Now it's time to freshen up. But again, that means rubbing oil on yourself, scraping it off, and maybe praying the gods give you a breeze. Spoiler again, they won't. The gods are busy turning you into soup. And let's talk fashion. You've got 2 clothing options, a chiton or a himation. Both are basically bed sheets with hopes and pins. Forget tailoring. Forget underwear. Forget wind safety. One gust and you're giving everyone a philosophy lesson in anatomy. And still, that's not even the worst of it. Your entire outfit is a colorless, sweat-soaked burrito wrap. If you're rich, you might wear dye, like purple or saffron. But most folks walk around in beige of despair. That's if their tunic hasn't disintegrated from last summer's laundry, which was a river, rock, and a prayer. The sun? Merciless. No hats. No sunscreen. Just you, a linen rectangle, and ultraviolet betrayal. So by mid-morning, you've carried water like a mule. Washed with oil like a roast chicken. Eaten a brick. Burned your shoulders. Stepped in at least 2 suspicious puddles. And congratulations, this was the best part of your day. Welcome to ancient Greece, where people dreamed of Olympus while sweating through their bedsheets and chewing on disappointment. And that's just getting started. So, you've survived the morning. You're sunburned, itchy, underfed, and overboiled. Naturally, it's time for some light civic duty, by which we mean prepare to fight, probably die, and still be criticized by a philosopher afterward. If you're a man, congrats, you're a soldier now in ancient Greece, especially Athens and Sparta. You don't join the army. You are the army. There's no draft notice. Just the fact that you're male, breathing, and old enough to hold a spear. From your early teens, you're training. Wooden swords, shield formations, endless drills. The goal? Stand shoulder to shoulder in a tight formation called the phalanx and hope your neighbor doesn't trip and take you down with him. Sparta takes it further. Boys start military training at age 7. It's called the agoge, which is ancient Greek for let's see who survives starvation, beatings, and emotional abandonment. They want soldiers, not kids. Toughness is everything. Feelings? That's tomorrow's problem. Athens is a bit softer. 2 years of training, then you're on military standby for the rest of your life. Even Socrates, the guy known for asking annoying questions, fought in real battles. No exceptions. You could be the world's best poet and they'll still hand you a spear. And there's always a war. Sparta versus Athens. Athens versus Persia. Sparta versus the world. Nobody's getting along. There's no peacetime. There's only less war for a minute. Gear up. If you can afford it, armor isn't issued. You buy your own. Bronze breastplate, helmet, greaves, shield, spear, it's all on you. Poorer folks? They make do with cloth, leather, or just nerves of steel. BYOB here means bring your own bronze. And when you're not in battle, you're training, or cleaning gear, or rowing a warship for hours because yes, the Navy doesn't row itself. Think cardio, but saltier and sadder. Afterward, there's no veterans benefits. No pensions. Just scars, trauma, and maybe a chipped gravestone that says he tried. That's your reward. And if you think that's rough, let's talk about being a woman in ancient Greece. Life as a woman, good luck out there. Actually, stay inside. In most city-states, especially Athens, being a woman means having fewer rights than a decorative pot. You can't vote, can't own land, can't attend plays, can't go outside much without being whispered about. Your job? Everything. You spin wool, weave fabric, grind grain, fetch water, bake bread, raise kids, manage slaves if your family has any. You're basically the unpaid CEO of the household. Except nobody thanks you and you can't quit. Education? Maybe, if you're lucky. But mostly you're taught how to run a house and obey men. Philosophy? Math? Debate? That's for the boys, sweetheart. Marriage? Happens early. You're likely a teenager. Your husband is not. He's probably twice your age and got you through a family deal involving livestock and a handshake. Love is optional. A dowry is required. Once you're married, your main role is to have sons and not be noticed. You live in the women's quarters. You eat after the men. You peek through lattice windows and maybe gossip with the neighbor while drawing water. Unless you're from Sparta. Spartan women are different. They're educated. They exercise in public. They can own land. Sounds better, right? Sure. Except all that freedom comes with a catch. Sparta is a war machine and your job is to give birth to future warriors. Lots of them. Strong ones. Or you're a disgrace. So, free? Technically. Empowered? Only if your womb cooperates. Bottom line, Greek society worshipped goddesses like Athena and Artemis. But real women? Expected to be silent, invisible, and indoors. You exist in a culture that praises intelligence, but not yours. Democracy. Some terms and conditions apply. Now, let's say you're a man in Athens. Congrats again. You're eligible for democracy. But before you get excited, here's the fine print. To participate, you must be male over 18, born to Athenian parents, not a slave, a woman, a foreigner, medic, or a child, which means about 90% of the population gets zero say in anything. So yes, democracy started in Athens. But it was really more of an exclusive club for sunburned dudes who owned property. But if you do qualify, you're not just voting occasionally. You're expected to show up a lot. There are no politicians. Just everyday citizens debating laws, judging trials, and occasionally yelling at each other in the assembly. They even ran the government using lottery. That's right. You could wake up a fishmonger and go to bed in charge of the treasury. No training. Just vibes. And if someone got too powerful, too charming, too popular, there was ostracism. Once a year, everyone would vote on who to exile for 10 years. No trial. Just write the name on a pottery shard. If you hit 6,000 votes, goodbye. Even heroes got the boot. One guy got ostracized just because people were tired of hearing how noble he was. Another, who literally saved Athens in battle, was kicked out for being annoying. So yes, Athens invented democracy. But it also invented cancel culture with shards. Ancient Greece gave the world so many big ideas. Freedom, justice, citizenship. But live there, and you'll quickly find out citizenship is limited, justice is loud, and freedom has rules. Lots of them next time. We dive deeper into slavery, medicine, and theater, aka people own people. Medicine is garlic and pain, and everyone's yelling in a mask. In ancient Greece, owning another human being wasn't rare or even questioned, it was just how the world worked. Slavery wasn't reserved for the wealthy elite. Even regular households had 1 or 2 slaves, not because they were rich, but because slavery was everywhere, baked into the system like barley into maza. Slaves came from conquered lands, Thracians, Syrians, even fellow Greeks unlucky enough to be born in the wrong city-state or captured during a skirmish. Some were prisoners of war, some were kidnapped, and some were just born into it. You could be literate and still be property. You could teach math, run a household, manage bank accounts, and still have no rights. No protections. No future. In Athens, a slave might cook your meals, carry your water, raise your children, and then stand silently in the background while you talked politics and justice over diluted wine. Some even ran businesses for their masters while the owners partied at symposiums, sipping wine and talking about freedom. Irony didn't come thicker than that. And then there were the mines. In places like Laurium, slaves were sent underground, including children, crawling through narrow tunnels filled with toxic dust, barely able to breathe, and dying for silver coins and civic pride. That wasn't just labor. It was cruelty engineered into an economy. If a slave earned freedom, and some did, they still weren't citizens. No land, no vote, no real autonomy. Just a better version of survival. Philosophers like Aristotle even tried to justify the whole thing, saying some people were slaves by nature. This from the man credited with inventing ethics. So, no, slavery wasn't a glitch in the system. It was the system. And while ancient Greece gave us beautiful words about equality and virtue, it also built those ideas on the backs of people who would never get to speak. If you got sick, things didn't get much better. There were no hospitals, no antibiotics, no understanding of germs. Feeling unwell? Hope you know someone who remembers a prayer or knows how to mash up garlic and poppy seeds. Maybe your neighbor has a scroll. Maybe your cousin swears by boiled figs. Diagnosis was less about symptoms and more about guesses. Was it too much black bile? A bad wind? Maybe the gods were angry. There were temples where you could sleep and hope for a dream that told you what to do. You might wake up with instructions from a priest or a snake. If you were wealthy, you could call in a physician, someone who quoted Hippocrates and smelled like olive oil. If you were poor, you got street advice and prayers. Treatments could include vinegar, fasting, chanting, or cutting open a vein to let out the excess humor. Bloodletting was the ancient version of turning it off and back on again. Surgery existed but was terrifying. No anesthesia, no antiseptics, just grit, leather to bite, and a lot of luck. Even childbirth, handled by midwives, was a deadly gamble. A breech birth or stuck shoulder could mean death for both mother and child. And if you died, there might not even be a proper burial. If your family was broke, you could end up dumped outside the city walls, unburied and forgotten, which the Greeks believed meant your soul would wander eternally. Medicine wasn't just painful. It was a lottery with garlic and hope as your tickets. And yet, for all that suffering, there was also theater. Because if you couldn't be healthy, at least you could be tragic. Theater in ancient Greece wasn't just entertainment, it was a civic ritual, a social mirror, and sometimes a spiritual punch to the gut. During festivals, citizens would pack into massive open-air theaters carved into hillsides. You sat on stone benches from dawn until night, watching play after play. No snacks, no bathrooms, no breaks. Just tragedy, comedy, and whatever came in between. Show up late? Get fined. Talk during the performance? Risk a beating. These weren't quiet crowds. People booed, cheered, threw things. Theater was emotional warfare. The tragedies were intense, families cursed by the gods, warriors driven mad, mothers murdering children. You cried publicly, surrounded by thousands of others also crying. Then came the comedies, which were less stand-up and more chaos. Satirical, crude, and loud. Politicians got roasted. Philosophers got dragged. There were fart jokes, sex jokes, costume jokes, and plenty of giant fake body parts waving in the breeze. The actors were all men, even in female roles. They wore masks with exaggerated expressions and spoke through megaphones built into their mouths. There was a chorus too, dancing and chanting, commenting on the action like a living Twitter thread. At the end, a jury would vote on which playwright won. Imagine crying your eyes out for 3 straight days only for a play about a drunk goat to take the prize. That was theater. It was democracy on stage, loud, messy, emotional, and unavoidable. Plays weren't just stories. They were conversations about life, justice, pride, and death. You didn't sit back and relax. You leaned in, argued, felt exposed. Theater held up a mirror to Greek society, and it didn't care if you liked the reflection. So, yes, ancient Greece was dirty, brutal, and unfair. But it also knew how to tell a story through wounds, words, and war. And it knew how to make sure you never forgot it. You're walking through the agora, trying to buy a few olives and maybe avoid getting sunstroke, when a man in a threadbare cloak and no shoes steps in front of you and says, "What is justice? Congratulations. You've been kidnapped into a philosophy debate." In ancient Greece, especially Athens, Philosophy wasn't a quiet activity tucked into libraries. It was public, aggressive, and relentless. The big names, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, weren't just thinkers. They were local celebrities, street-level intellectual hurricanes with a tendency to ruin your afternoon. Socrates, for example, made a career out of asking innocent questions that led you into existential panic. He didn't write anything down, didn't care about fame, and usually left people more confused than when he found them. His student Plato wrote it all down later, but by then Socrates was dead. Executed, actually. The official charge was corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods. But really, he just wouldn't shut up. Philosophy in Athens was a contact sport. There were no stages or seminars. You debated in the streets, in the markets, wherever people gathered. There were no microphones, no PowerPoint slides. Just raised voices, flying gestures, and wounded egos. And you couldn't escape it. Walk past Plato's academy and say something slightly off, and suddenly you're the example of the unexamined life. Even kids weren't safe. Aristotle, another big name, tutored Alexander the Great, who later conquered half the known world. Imagine your high school civics teacher handing you a sword and saying, "Go fix this." Philosophy was everywhere, and it was exhausting. It wasn't about finding answers. It was about asking better questions, the kind that made you stare at a wall for 3 hours and reconsider your lunch choices. But it wasn't optional. You lived in a society that believed thinking was a civic duty, even if it ruined your day. And if all that questioning and public debating made you popular, that could be a problem. In Athens, being well-liked was dangerous. Not because people were jealous, but because they had a system in place to deal with citizens who got too big for their sandals. It was called ostracism. Once a year, the city would vote on whether anyone should be kicked out for 10 years. No trial, no defense. Just scribble their name on a piece of broken pottery, and if they got enough votes, poof, gone. It didn't matter if you were a hero, a genius, or just really good at speeches. If the crowd decided you were a threat to democracy or just plain annoying, they exiled you. You kept your property. You weren't arrested. You just had to leave. Some people were ostracized for being too noble, others for being too competent. Even generals who saved Athens in war got the boot once they got too famous. And 10 years later, you could come back like nothing happened. No grudge, no apology. Just welcome back. Try not to be inspiring this time. All of this was meant to protect democracy from tyrants, but it mostly punished success. You had to walk a fine line. Smart but not smug, popular but not beloved, helpful but not heroic. You couldn't be too anything, because too anything got you exiled by Shard. But exile wasn't the worst fate. Death was always nearby. Life expectancy in ancient Greece hovered around 30. That's if you made it out of childhood, which many didn't. 1 in 3 children died early. Disease was constant. Medical care was minimal. And even a small wound could kill you if it turned septic. Fever could be too much blood. Melancholy? Probably excess black bile. A rash? Bad humors or bad luck. Either way, no cure. War was everywhere. If you were a man, odds were you die holding a spear or rowing a trireme into battle. And if you didn't die immediately, your injuries might finish you off later. There were no antibiotics, no hospitals, just prayers and garlic. And then there were the gods. If you offended the wrong deity, or forgot a sacrifice, stepped on a sacred site, insulted a temple statue, or said something dumb while drunk, you might find yourself cursed, struck by lightning, or chased by a plague. The gods were not chill. They were dramatic, vengeful, and painfully involved in human affairs. Apollo might love your city, but only if your cousin didn't offend him last year. Hera might be the goddess of marriage, but if Zeus looked your way, she'd ruin your life just for sport. And if the gods didn't get you, a mosquito might, or spoiled food, or childbirth, or slipping in the street and breaking something you couldn't fix. Death didn't need a reason. It was just waiting for a crack in your routine. If your family couldn't afford a proper burial, you might not even get one. No funeral, no coins for the ferryman. Just your body dumped outside the city, forgotten. And to the Greeks, that wasn't just sad, it was dangerous. They believed unburied souls wandered forever, trapped between life and death, cursed to roam the world without rest. So yes, the philosophers thought deeply. The politicians debated loudly. The playwrights mourned beautifully. But for most people, life was short, dirty, and unpredictable. And the end came fast. Still, they lived. They argued. They created. Even in the face of constant illness, public shame, exile, and divine punishment, they built a world that still echoes today. They didn't have comfort. They didn't have safety. What they had was curiosity, stubbornness, and an unshakable need to ask why. And sometimes, even when the olive carts were rolling and the sun was too much and the bread was stale, someone would pause, stare into the distance, and wonder out loud, what is virtue? And that was enough to make everything stop, for better or worse. The Greeks had gods for everything. Not just the big ones like Zeus, Athena, and Poseidon, but local spirits, household deities, and mythical creatures with very personal grudges. Religion wasn't once a week. It was every day, woven into every breath, meal, and movement. If something went wrong, sick cow, bad harvest, stubbed toe, it was probably your fault. Maybe you missed a ritual. Maybe your grandfather offended a river god. Maybe you stepped in the wrong grove or forgot to pour a little wine on the ground before drinking. Divine punishment didn't come with a note. It just arrived, loud and messy. The Olympians weren't peaceful guardians. They were emotionally unstable immortals with trust issues and lightning bolts. Say the wrong prayer, sink your ship, spill your offering, start a famine, build a temple on land sacred to someone else, snakebite, plague, death. It wasn't enough to worship. You had to worship correctly at the right time with the right words while facing the right direction, and probably while not thinking bad thoughts about the god's latest romantic disaster. Sacrifices were regular, often bloody, and always symbolic. Goats, bulls, wine, fruit, if it could be offered, it was. But even that didn't guarantee anything. The gods worked in mysterious, petty, deeply personal ways. One wrong move and your whole village could be cursed. Apollo might curse your lineage for centuries over a single insult. Athena might bless your wisdom, then turn you into a spider for winning an argument. Divine consistency was not part of the deal. And it wasn't just the big gods you had to worry about. There were nymphs in the rivers, dryads in the trees, spirits in the crossroads. Step in the wrong place, say the wrong thing, and you could be dealing with a haunting, a transformation, or just an eternal bad luck streak. Greeks didn't go looking for trouble. Trouble was already everywhere. The entire world was spiritually booby-trapped. Still, they built temples, held festivals, danced and feasted in honor of the gods who might destroy them on a whim. Because in Greece, religion wasn't about love or comfort. It was about survival. You feared the gods, respected them, and tried not to get noticed. You didn't worship out of faith. You worshipped to avoid catastrophe. And yet, in all this chaos, sunburns, snake bites, divine grudges, there was meaning. There was rhythm. The Greeks turned their suffering into stories, their confusion into rituals, their fear into beauty. They built shrines in every town, raised columns so tall they still stand, and etched prayers into stone as if shouting into eternity. So now the real question: would you survive in ancient Greece? Let's not sugarcoat it. Probably not. You'd fold before breakfast. The heat, the diet, the complete lack of comfort would flatten you in a day. You're used to filtered water, ergonomic chairs, and being able to say no to group nudity. Ancient Greece doesn't care about your needs. You wake up sweating, carry water like a mule, eat stale barley, scrape oil off your skin, and pray your goat doesn't knock over the clay oven again. There's no privacy, no toothpaste, no rights if you're a woman, a slave, a foreigner, or just unpopular. You're either dodging war, dodging exile, or dodging philosophical questions from a barefoot man who hasn't blinked in 4 minutes. And when the gods get bored, they send you a plague or turn your cousin into a tree. You miss modern medicine, running water, and the right to exist without being drafted into a war you didn't start. You miss breakfast. You miss coffee. You miss not having to share your bathroom with livestock. And just when you think you've gotten the hang of it, bang, ostracized, or conscripted, or dead from something dumb like stepping on a nail. But the Greeks didn't just survive this. They thrived in it. They built a civilization that shaped half the modern world. They asked questions that still haunt classrooms. They wrote plays that still get standing ovations. They debated justice, invented geometry, mapped the stars, and made stories out of every struggle. They gave the chaos shape and meaning and legacy. You wouldn't last a day, but they lasted centuries. Not because they had it easy, but because they refused to let hardship be the end of the story. They questioned everything, argued with everyone, fought with passion, and died young more often than not. And still, they kept building. So maybe, just maybe, after the sunburn faded and the lice stopped biting, you'd find a little purpose in the struggle too. You'd wrap that linen tighter, haul that amphora up the hill, and keep going, because you had no choice. And because somewhere in all the noise and dust and olive oil, there's a kind of clarity you can't find anywhere else. You'd still complain, but you'd carry it anyway. Welcome to ancient Greece. Let's say you've survived long enough in ancient Greece to not be completely stunned by the heat or the goat-related chaos anymore. You figured out how to scrape oil off your arms without cutting yourself, how to drink just enough watered-down wine to avoid the parasites without becoming the town embarrassment, and maybe, just maybe, you've learned which philosopher to avoid when walking through the agora. But life isn't slowing down, because in ancient Greece, there's always something else waiting to knock you flat. And right now, it's religion again. Not just the major gods this time, but the rituals. Rituals are everywhere. They're how you start the day, how you cook, how you bury your dead, and how you keep whatever invisible spirits are hovering over your city from smiting your crops. If someone gets sick, you don't just call a healer. You purify the house. You burn incense, chant prayers, and maybe sacrifice a chicken if things look serious. If someone dies, and that's not an if, it's a when, you need to bury them quickly with proper rites or risk a restless spirit wandering around and making everyone's life worse. You place coins on their eyes to pay the ferryman. You chant. You pour wine into the dirt. You light fires. All of it has to be done right or they don't make it to the afterlife, and you don't make it through the night without hearing noises no goat could be responsible for. These rituals aren't suggestions. They're survival guides. And if you skip them, you're not edgy, you're cursed. Greeks didn't separate the natural and the supernatural. A storm wasn't just weather. It was a mood. A disease wasn't just a problem in the body. It was something wrong in the world, in your soul, in your village. Healing someone meant realigning the universe, not just giving them a poultice and telling them to walk it off. There's no real privacy to grieve. Death happens out in the open. Funerals are public. Wailing is expected. Mourning isn't subtle, it's loud, chaotic, and full of symbolism. Women tear their hair. Men speak to the sky. And kids learn early that death is a constant part of life. You don't get to hide from it. It's a neighbor. Meanwhile, life around you keeps rolling. There's always another festival, another sacrifice, another public debate or theatrical performance where someone pretends to be a god and someone else throws olives at their head. Religion in ancient Greece isn't peaceful. It's not about faith. It's about function. You participate or you're out of sync with reality. You go to the festivals, eat the burnt offerings, join the procession, sing the hymns. Not because you're pious, but because everyone else is doing it and you really don't want to be the person who gets blamed for the next failed harvest. But for all the ritual and fear and superstition, there's something beautiful about how much the Greeks involve the divine in daily life. They don't keep the sacred locked away. It's in your cooking, your footsteps, the sky, the wind, the coin in your hand. It's exhausting. It's paranoid. But it's also a way of making sense out of a world that barely made sense to begin with. And through all of this, you keep living. You don't stop. The days are hot. The nights are cold. Your food is dry and your knees are sore. But you get up, put on your linen burrito of a tunic and try again. You haul water. You grind grain. You share what little you have. You argue with your cousin over who forgot to bribe the local river nymph. You attend a tragedy that makes you cry harder than you expected, even if you're sitting on a stone bench and your back is screaming. You start to realize that the Greeks weren't obsessed with beauty and philosophy because life was easy. It was because life was relentless and beauty and philosophy were the only ways to fight back. They didn't build temples to show off. They built them to remind themselves that life could be bigger than their problems. They didn't debate virtue because they were bored. They did it because they were surrounded by injustice, chaos, and disease, and they needed to believe there was still a better way to live. So you keep going. You pay your taxes. You honor your dead. You tell your kids the myths. You listen to a man in the street ask questions you don't know how to answer. And maybe without realizing it, you become a little more Greek. A little more used to the sun, the heat, the hardship. A little more willing to question what matters. A little more connected to the invisible web of stories, gods, and rituals that holds your strange, difficult world together. And maybe you still wouldn't last forever. But now at least you'd last longer than you thought. You've made it through another day without dying of heat stroke, stepping on a nail, or being struck down by a god in a bad mood. That's an achievement. Your feet hurt, your back hurts, and your stomach is grumbling because the barley cake you had earlier doesn't count as food in any real sense of the word. But still, you're upright. And in ancient Greece, upright means victory. You start to notice how life moves in circles here. Days don't really change, they repeat. The sun rises. You fetch water. You squint through the heat. You work. You avoid the worst of the gods. You try to stay on your neighbor's good side and avoid drawing attention from people with power. You survive, not by standing out, but by staying just invisible enough to not be anyone's problem. And yet, for all that repetition, nothing feels stable. Peace is just the pause before the next fight. Quiet is just the space before someone starts yelling about justice or honor or who forgot to make the proper offering before planting season. There's always something. Maybe your cousin got conscripted again. Maybe your neighbor got into a shouting match at the assembly and now people are scribbling his name on pottery shards. Maybe someone insulted the wrong priestess and now the whole street is under a spiritual cloud, which is code for we're all going to suffer for this until further notice. You stop expecting good days. You start measuring success in degrees of inconvenience. How bad was the news? How much did it cost you? Did anyone die? No? Then you're fine. Barely, but fine. You see the cracks in the system. People talk about democracy like it's a miracle, but it's mostly a crowd of sunburned men yelling over each other while someone tries to remember the right ritual to avoid a thunderstorm. Laws are made and unmade depending on who shouts the loudest. Justice is a concept that lives somewhere between ideal and accident. Trials are decided by juries of citizens who were chosen at random and might not understand what's happening, but who all showed up because they got paid a few drachmas and didn't want to lose their slot. And the gods are always watching. Or so you're told. Some days you believe it. You see a pattern in the stars or a lucky break in the market and you think, yes, maybe someone's looking out for me. Then you trip in the street, crack your head on a stone, and remember, the gods give and take in equal measure, usually without warning. You see people offer everything they have at a shrine just to ask for rain or safe childbirth or to pass a vote in the assembly. You see others curse the gods outright, daring them to strike. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. There's no pattern, no fairness. Just stories passed down to explain the chaos. You cling to them anyway. You know death is always close. You hear it in the way people talk about life, always like it's borrowed. You see it in how fast funerals happen. Someone dies in the morning, they're buried by nightfall. There's no time to process. No time to mourn in peace. You burn the body, whisper the right words, leave the right coins, and move on. Because there's work to do, fields to tend, bread to bake. You cry while kneading dough and try not to think about the smell of ash still clinging to your tunic. But amid all this, there are moments, tiny, strange, stubborn moments, that feel like something more. A child laughing at the fountain while goats fight over a bucket. A stranger offering you figs without asking for anything in return. A chorus in a play singing something that hits you so hard you forget to breathe. A philosopher saying something that sticks in your ribs for days. A glimpse of the sea at dusk, so wide and blue and endless it makes your knees go soft. And those moments, they're why you stay. Why you carry on. You start to understand that the Greeks didn't just create civilization, they created a way of enduring it. Of enduring each other. Of making beauty out of mess. They were loud, flawed, brutal, brilliant. They argued more than they prayed. They drank more than they bathed. They wrote poems about pain and sang hymns about war. They built temples to order the world even though the world never stayed in order for long. You feel it in your bones, the weight of their contradictions. They believed in freedom but owned slaves. They worshipped wisdom and banished their smartest thinkers. They spoke of harmony while going to war every other month. And yet somehow none of that stopped them from reaching for something higher. They knew how broken they were, and they tried anyway. You get it now. You understand why people still talk about this place, why their stories stuck. Because they weren't just telling myths. They were trying to explain what it means to live in a world that never makes sense. And they were doing it while covered in dust, drenched in sweat, terrified of gods, surrounded by death, and still trying to be better. So you pick up the jug. You fix your tunic. You carry the weight. And you keep walking. The days stretch on, not in peaceful quiet, but in heat, noise, and obligation. You begin to understand that there is no such thing as a day off. Every morning brings another task, another errand, another favor owed to someone whose name you can't stand but whose help you might need when the next shipment of grain gets delayed. There's always something broken, missing, stolen, or threatening to fall apart. The walls crack, the roof leaks, the goat escapes again and starts eating someone's offerings left at the roadside altar. That's your day: patch, chase, barter, apologize. You live in a city that runs on dust and argument. The streets are clogged with vendors shouting over each other, children running barefoot, dogs barking, and older men having the same political debate they've had every day for the past decade. Nothing is quiet. Even silence is temporary. If you manage to slip away for a moment, to sit near a tree or by a well, someone will find you. They'll ask for something. Water, money, news, advice, opinion. You can't disappear here. You're woven into it. And yet you've adapted. You know which stalls in the market water down their wine. You know which wells run dry by afternoon. You know how to patch a tunic using thread you pulled from another one that already gave up. You've learned how to argue without raising your voice. You've figured out how to fake confidence when you're cold, sick, or hungry. You've developed instincts: when to keep your head down, when to speak up, and when to pretend you didn't hear someone mention your name during a council meeting. You've also learned the value of performance. Not theater, though that's part of it, but everyday performance. The way you nod during public readings even if you don't understand half of what's being said. The way you recite prayers out loud but leave certain lines out because you don't really believe them anymore. The way you act like you're not afraid of war, of the gods, of dying from some nameless sickness that starts with a chill and ends in your family carrying your body to the nearest fire pit. You put on a face. So does everyone else. Sometimes, late at night, you wonder what your life might have been like somewhere else. In another time, you hear rumors of people far away, barbarians, the Greeks call them, who live in forests, ride horses, don't build cities. You wonder if they sleep better. If they look up at the stars without thinking of gods, or guilt, or sacrifice. You wonder if it's easier not to know so much. If ignorance is freedom or just a different kind of prison. But then the fire crackles. Someone laughs in the next house. You smell garlic and ash and warm wine. You remember the lines of a poem someone shouted in the agora days ago about courage, or fate, or the sound of bronze on bronze in battle. And something inside you softens. You know you wouldn't trade this for anything, not really. It's hard. It's unfair, but it's yours. And when the temple bell rings the next morning, calling the city to another day of trade, chores, rituals, and risk, you'll get up. Again. Without ceremony. Without complaint. Because that's what it means to be alive here. And through it all, the contradictions remain. Your city is filled with statues of heroes and gods, and half the people living under their shadows can't vote, speak freely, or walk outside without suspicion. There are temples to wisdom in a society that still believes epilepsy is divine punishment. There are plays written about justice performed for audiences that exile their own friends for being too clever. And somehow none of it collapses. Somehow it all stays standing. Maybe it's because the Greeks, more than anything, understood that you could live in a broken world and still try to make something lasting. That truth didn't have to be clean. That meaning could be carved from contradiction. They weren't interested in perfection. They were interested in clarity. In confronting the mess, in wrestling it into poetry, philosophy, laws, and laughter. You begin to realize that survival here isn't about strength or beauty or cleverness. It's about endurance, holding on through the boredom, the discomfort, the daily grind, listening when someone's speaking even if you're too tired to care, showing up when you don't feel like it, making your tiny corner of the city just a little less chaotic even if it means nothing in the grand scheme of things. And sometimes, unexpectedly, something happens that shakes you. Someone dies, a friend, a neighbor, a person you nodded to every morning and barely knew. And you feel it like a sudden tear in fabric. The market sounds different. The path to the well seems longer. You try to keep walking, but you feel the hole they left behind. That's when the rituals matter. The coins, the chants, the gatherings. Not because they work, but because they remind you that others have walked this path before. That death is ancient, but so is mourning. So is memory. So is the need to keep going. You carry your grief like everything else here. Quietly. Without fanfare. It becomes part of you. And still, the city moves. The sun rises. The agora fills. A child is born somewhere. A philosopher mutters something confusing. A priest lights a fire. A soldier walks home. And you, caught in the middle of it all, carry water back to your home with the cracked wall, still hoping the goat hasn't eaten your bedding again. You're tired, but not broken. Not yet. You're not sure when it happened. But one day you look around and realize you're no longer pretending. You're not acting like someone who belongs here. You do belong here. You know when the markets shift and which gods to mention depending on the season. You can guess how long the bread's been out just by the way the seller holds the tray. You can hear the tone in someone's voice and tell if they're about to tell a joke, pick a fight, or ask for a favor they can't repay. You've started dreaming in fragments of old poems and overheard arguments. You don't think about surviving ancient Greece anymore. You're just living it. But that doesn't mean it's easier. If anything, the weariness is sharper now, more focused. You're not startled by discomfort. You just measure it differently. You can't remember the last time your feet didn't ache, or the last time you were full after a meal, or the last time you truly trusted the weather to stay the way it started. Everything is temporary, so you become good at adjusting. You become good at waiting for the well to fill, for the debt to be forgiven, for the harvest to come in, for someone to remember they owe you a favor, for something to go right. And in the waiting, you start to notice things you didn't before. How quiet the city gets just after dusk, when the fires are lit but the shouting hasn't begun. How the smell of fish from the docks can carry all the way to the Acropolis if the wind's right. How certain stones in the road are worn smoother than others, not because of craftsmanship, but because of thousands of years of feet walking the same line. You look down and realize you're part of that line now. Your own footsteps are wearing grooves into the world, whether anyone remembers your name or not. Most people won't remember your name. That's something you've accepted. You won't be a statue. You won't have your deeds sung at the Dionysia. You won't have a philosopher write you into a dialogue or a general carve your name into marble. You're not a warrior. You're not a statesman. You're just here. A citizen, maybe. A medic, maybe. Or maybe not even that. Maybe you don't have a title. Maybe you're just someone who sells onions or fixes shoes or grinds flour in the dark hours before sunrise so someone else can bake it. But that doesn't mean your life is small. It just means it isn't loud. The city needs you even if it doesn't say it. The world is held together by the hands that aren't seen. You know this because you've seen what happens when those hands stop working. When the woman who always swept the temple steps is gone for a day and everyone walks more carefully without knowing why. When the man who sells clay cups gets sick and people start drinking out of their hands and muttering about bad omens. The city notices, even if it doesn't say your name. And maybe, in some strange way, that's what keeps you going. Not legacy, not glory, just the small, invisible gravity of being part of something that doesn't stop. The way your own body knows how to move in the crowd without thinking. The way you can follow the rhythms of the year not because you mark the calendar, but because the air itself starts to smell different when a new god's festival approaches. You feel the world shifting, always just enough to keep you humble. You've also stopped asking big questions out loud, not because you're afraid, but because the answers don't matter the way you thought they did. Or maybe because the answers are everywhere now, scattered in gestures, in weather, in the way someone places a fig on your doorstep without saying a word. You used to wonder what virtue meant. Now you think it might just mean not lying when someone asks how you're doing, or sharing your last olive even though you're hungry, or listening when someone's voice cracks and pretending not to notice. You've stopped looking for fairness. Greece doesn't promise fairness. Promises participation. And if you're lucky, maybe understanding. The man who wins the trial didn't always deserve it. The woman who's shamed by rumor may never recover. A bad harvest might follow a year of perfect rituals. A good man might die in a gutter while a thief gets elected to council. But still, you show up. You keep showing up. That's what makes you Greek now. Not blood or birthplace. Just the sheer persistence of walking into another flawed day and giving it what you have. And when the city celebrates, you celebrate. You stand in the square during the festival and watch torches flicker against the dark. You listen to children sing words they don't understand yet. You watch dancers leap like their feet aren't sore, like they weren't grinding grain or carrying bricks this morning. You feel the wine warm your chest. You look at the stars and think briefly that maybe the gods are watching after all, and that maybe they're smiling just a little. Because for all the chaos, the filth, the superstition, the hunger, the injustice, there's something about this place that makes you stay. Something about being surrounded by people who are also just trying to live through another day without being ruined by it. Something about surviving side by side, again and again, and calling it civilization. And so the fire dies down. The streets go quiet. Someone laughs in the distance. The same stones, the same stars, the same tired gods. And tomorrow, the goat will probably escape again.